What about the future of Putin and Russia? Do you believe there's something in that? Have you heard anything about it?
I do believe that there is a very real possibility that the Russian Federation could begin to break apart next year, depending on how, what happens in Crimea, what happens on the other side. When you look at these the characters over there, you have Prigozhin, who spends most of his time doing TikTok, visiting his own troops, and criticizing Shoigu and Gerasimov, the defense minister and the chief of the Russian General Staff. Very publicly. And I think he sees himself either as the savior for Putin or the successor. But clearly, he feels no allegiance to the General Staff, and he complains that they are, screwing him over, that they don't provide him what he needs. I think actually the Russian General Staff hopes he fails. They would rather see him fail than their own guys succeed, because he is such a pain to them. But he's still got Wagner troops all over Africa, and they're guarding gold mines, diamond mines. That's how he finances his whole operation. Then you've got Kadyrov, the leader of the Chechens. The Ukrainians refer to them as the TikTok army because there's always video of them standing around with their vehicles on parade and all that, but you don't ever see video of dead Chechens. So I think Kadyrov is somehow keeping his guys out of the worst part of the fighting so that either they are in position to break away a third Chechen war, if you will, or maybe he sees himself showing up just in time to be the savior. I don't know. But fortunately for Ukraine and fortunately for us, the Russians have still, after 9 years, not managed to establish a coherent command and control structure that can unify all the different advantages that Russia should normally have, because these guys hate each other so much. And this is why I think there is a possibility of some of the 85 or so republics and areas and other entities that make up the Russian Federation. Of course, there will always be a Russia, but the Russian Federation consists of 80 plus other entities out there. And I'm not sure all of them want to remain a part of what once was the Russian Empire. So if Crimea is lost, then I think it would be very, very unlikely that Putin would still be in power.
Would you welcome the breakup of the Russian Federation?
It would concern me. I think it could be a natural outcome of this. The British Empire broke up. Everybody's, except Russia, everybody's empire eventually comes apart. Now, it can be peaceful or it can be extremely violent. So I don't like the phrase regime change because, we have our own experience in the U.S. with regime change, and it never works out the way you think it will. So this is something that's for the Russian people to decide. But we should, you can't dismiss it out of hand. We should be thinking about what are the implications. What happens to all these nuclear weapons? What happens to the control of the energy infrastructure? There will be violence as certain regions see that maybe this is their chance to finally get out from under the yoke of the Kremlin. But I would not be scared of it. And we should not be scared that whoever comes after Putin might be worse. I can't imagine anybody that would be worse. So we should not be scared of that.
The first one would be, what, in your view, are the geopolitical implications already of the Ukraine war? Think of the global south, India, think of Central Asia, think of Taiwan and China. How do you see that, these consequences of the Ukraine war?
Well, from a geostrategic perspective, we see what failed deterrence looks like. We've been reminded what we've known from thousands of years of history, that if there is an aggressor out there or an autocrat or a dictator, if they see opportunity, they're going to exploit it. And we failed to react properly after 2008 and 2014, and so here we are. So that's one thing that is a major takeaway for me. We've also been reminded that not everybody sees the inherent beauty and value of supporting Ukraine. There are a lot of countries in Africa. Almost every country in Africa either abstained or voted in favor of Russia in the recent UN General Assembly non-binding statement, because they see opportunity, advantage, or profit when Russia or China operates and brings investment, even if it results in these terrible debt traps. The fact is, we have not consistently invested or worked hard enough to have the relationships necessary in Africa and in some other parts of the Middle East and Asia. I think it's probably been a little bit of a surprise that India and Brazil have not been more pro-West, because each of them has their own geopolitical issues with which they have to deal as well. Iran is, for me, this is well beyond my expertise. I mean, they have got a terrible situation at home. These incredibly brave women that are continue to protest out there, despite a crackdown, that's still, I mean, this is still going on. It's not getting the same coverage it was, and maybe it's not on the same scale, but that's still going on. So Iran doubling down on the crackdown of them and handcuffing themselves to Russia, I can only believe that they have been given some sort of indication from Moscow that will help them accelerate their nuclear development, that there's some kind of huge advantage for them to do this, because obviously they're not winning any friends. And then finally, of course, China is in such an important role here as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. They've been caught with their hand in the cookie jar, planning to provide weapons to Russia. We'll see if President Biden said he didn't think they're actually going to go through with it, and I would agree with him on that. But they're watching closely to see how much resolve and steel the West has. I mean, are we willing to see it through to help Ukraine defeat Russia? Are we really serious about defending all of our values, sovereignty, international law, freedom of navigation, human rights? Are we really serious about that? And if not, then I think China will see that they could pretty much almost do whatever they want in the Indo-Pacific region. So this is the most frustrating thing for me, and I think it stems from the fact that we can't say we want Ukraine to win, or we have stopped short of saying that, and therefore we find reasons or concerns of why we don't want to perhaps provoke Russia. I mean, that's how it comes out. Or they'll say we don't have enough for ourselves. That I've heard that as a reason or justification for not providing the ATACMS, for example. Or on the M1 tanks, well, it'll take too long to train. It's a maintenance problem. And all so all these things start sounding like excuses. And I think it boils down to we don't have clarity of how we want this to end. If we did, we wouldn't be having all these debates about, what kind of fuel does the M1 tank? As I listened to all the discussions about M1 tanks, I started wondering, well, why the hell do we have them if there's so many problems with them? And it's obvious that these were being put out as excuses rather than policy justification. So I think it has to do with concern of provocation and concern, do we have enough if we got into a conflict with China?
If Crimea is non-negotiable, does that mean that this war has been fought or it has to be fought to complete victory? Or do you see room for negotiations centering around other issues such as NATO membership?
I think a lot of good people are trying to figure out a way to, is there some path to a negotiated conclusion that is acceptable? At this point, I don't see that, but I could imagine at some point, it has always been a principle of the alliance that nations get to make their own choices, that Russia does not get veto authority over who joins NATO. So I think to offer up that, okay, we promise Ukraine will never join NATO would be a break with a long-standing policy. And also, that's not why Russia went into Ukraine. They weren't worried about Ukraine joining NATO. What they really are worried about is Ukraine being in the European Union and becoming so successful economically and the quality of life going up. And so to have a large, booming, successful liberal democracy on the border of Russia is something that Putin could not possibly tolerate. So the NATO thing, I always thought that was a part of the fairy tale narrative. I have heard people say, well, what if Crimea had some sort of special status where Russia would leave it, but Ukraine would not put troops on there? That on the surface, that says, okay, well, that might answer the problem of Ukraine's economy and so on. But then you wake up and realize Russia has violated so many agreements about that region already. Why should we all of a sudden expect that now they would live up to any agreement? So unless there was a massive peacekeeping force provided by multiple nations, I can't imagine. And then again, why should Russian aggression be rewarded? That Kerch Bridge will still be there. So if Crimea had neutral status or some sort of autonomous status, would the Russians have to take the bridge down? Because that still interferes with shipping major large ships in and out of Azov Sea.